Welcome back. We are here with a very special guest, Mr. Guy. I'm going to say Mr. Guy and Mr. Ed. I dig it. How are we doing, guys?
I'm going to go first as it's Dr. Ed,
Yes,
as I
it's
always
Dr. Ed. Please
remind.
be Dr. Ed. I worked hard for those
And
letters.
this isn't medical advice and all of that stuff. Most people that listen to this know that I'm in a scientific institute doing a PhD studying lactate amongst other things, and just like being amongst people that are studying interesting and related stuff to what we are interested in. And fortunately, I managed to convince my friend Guy, who has kind of come into the lab that I work in and is trying to pioneer a breathwork research institute lab here.
That's awesome.
Much to the difficulty of trying to fight the system where there's not necessarily any easy sources of funding for something that doesn't necessarily involve the outcome of creating a drug or pharmaceutical intervention. But I just thought it'd be great to discuss with Guy his own PhD, his journey towards becoming interested in breathwork, what breathwork he's doing at the moment, the studies he's published, the future of breathwork, what he sees that as, where it's going, and his experience
Beautiful.
of the Swami that I introduced him to. So I will stop talking and let him say.
Yeah, well, I'm not a medical doctor, so I can say what I want.
I love it. Yes.
Yeah, my journey into breathwork goes back to probably around 2016. I was doing my exchange year in California at university, and I was introduced to meditation. And I read this book by the Dalai Lama and became very fascinated by the practice of meditation and Buddhism in general. And after I graduated, I moved to China. I was studying and learning Mandarin there, and my health wasn't at its best. I was quite tired a lot of the time.
Okay.
And I wasn't. Yeah, my undergraduate was in international business and Mandarin, so I was pursuing a path not related
towards the financial sector. Yeah.
yeah. I worked in the startup, did all that kind of stuff in California.
Okay. Awesome.
Thing. Yeah, tried all that stuff out, and moved to China. I found myself, I don't know how to say it, just not motivated by what I was doing. Not it was all extrinsic. It wasn't really for anything intrinsic and rewarding for me.
Okay.
And at that point, I just decided, I'm interested in meditation. I like these contemplative practices. Why don't I just research them? Because I found out that there were institutes at Oxford, at Sussex, researching meditation and mindfulness, and also John Kabat-Zinn in the US. I thought I want to be like them. They seem like good role models and people to be like. And if I work in that sort of environment, the people around there will also, it'll be a warm environment to work in, and people will be mindful, and it would just be a good atmosphere to be in.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I decided to quit learning Chinese. I stopped the grant and the funding that I got and the scholarship, and decided to apply for a master's conversion in psychology in Scotland at St Andrews. And before I went, I went to India and Sri Lanka. I trained in a couple of different meditation practices. One retreat was in Tibetan Buddhism. That was
Beautiful.
A retreat up in the Himalayas, on the foothills, and then went down to Sri Lanka. Went to an ashram, yoga ashram, and learned. Actually, was first exposed to breathwork there. We're doing these practices, and also when I was in India, I remember telling people that I breathe. I have a tendency to breathe through my mouth, and they kind of looked at me in disgust, like, "Why would you do that?" This is so long ago. So I'd already been exposed to breathwork, but I kind of just ignored it. I was like, why do you want to focus on controlling your breathing when you can just observe it, as in meditation? And that's the way to achieve enlightenment, is to live in the moment by focusing on your breathing and all that sort of stuff. So I Did another intense meditation retreat in Sri Lanka in the jungle, and it was in something called Vipassana. It's extremely intense, very quite hardcore. It's like 16, 18 hours of meditation a day.
Wow.
And, yeah, you're getting up at 4 a.m. and every day, and it's intense. It's intense, and it was
Now, is this intensity for a short amount of time? I mean, obviously, you went there for like a workshop, so you stayed there for. But are these monks doing this on the daily basis, just meditating
yeah,
18 hours a day?
yeah. So
Whoa.
sat next to me on my left were probably 15 Buddhist monks doing this meditation retreat with us, because
Okay.
that was one of their instructions, was to do this, because I mean, some of them will meditate more. They're supposed to be meditating all the time, right? Even when they're walking and
Right.
eating, etc. So in terms of formal meditation, sitting down, we were doing about 16 hours a day.
Wow.
Um,
Crazy. That's a
yeah,
lot of sitting.
it was a lot of sitting. They have these you have these 1 hour periods, three of them throughout the day, called hours of determination, and you're supposed to just sit there completely still, and whenever the pain comes up, like it will if you're sitting completely still, you just have to pay attention to it, and examine its qualities of pain, like what is pain, and just trying to stay as still as possible and not moving at all. And as the retreat goes on, you can actually get to a point where you don't move at all for a whole hour, just sitting.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was an experience, and I went back home and into the UK, and I moved up to Scotland, St Andrews, to study psychology. And at the end of the first semester, I became really sick. I was under a lot of stress. I think I had some kind of generalized anxiety disorder. And these are the reasons why I wanted to really pursue meditation and mindfulness, because I thought that would be the answer. Instead of living in the future, live in the present. Don't worry,
Hmm.
no worries of the past. Just be here and now, and that's the key. And that's ultimately what guided me there. But yeah, as I was saying, I was very stressed, and something happened to me, and I developed chronic fatigue syndrome.
Okay.
And that forced me to take a 2 year leave of absence from my 1 year masters. Um, and during this time, COVID happened. And before COVID happened, I found out about the Wim Hof method, the intense breathing and ice bath. Um, and for the first time, doing that breathing kind of gave me a sense of control over my symptoms. It kind of stopped me having these relapses of chronic fatigue at the start.
Okay.
And I read the famous paper that came out in 2014 in the Proceeding of National Academies of Sciences, which studied the Wim Hof method, and it showed all these benefits in terms of inflammation and cortisol. So yeah, going from this is a long story, but I'll try and keep it
No, this
short.
is perfect, dude. I like it. We need
Um,
context.
yeah, so I started off with the Wim Hof method, doing that intensely for half a year, like an hour a day, 2 sessions of 30 minutes, and it was helping me. But then I kind of became fascinated with different practices, and I reached out to some psychiatrists in New York, Richard Brown and Patricia Gerberg, and they own this foundation called the Breath Body Mind Foundation. And they said to me, the Wim Hof method probably isn't what you need for your system, which is already heavily dysregulated. If you want to heal long term, you probably want to do these more gentle practices. And I trained with them during the pandemic in this method of breath, body, mind. So it's a trauma informed practices taken from all over the world, but kind of repackaged into a secular format, more accessible for people. It
Okay.
includes tapping, um, shaking, breath work, different types, alternate nostril breathing. The core one is coherent breathing. And then there's also meditation in there as well. But the core practice, it's mostly formed around this practice of coherent breathing, which is breathing at a rate of around 5 to 6 breaths per minute,
Okay.
used in heart rate variability biofeedback. And Ed will be able to talk about what coherent breathing is and what exactly means after I've done this introduction.
Yeah.
Um,
Beautiful.
so I trained with them. I worked with Richard to overcome my chronic fatigue syndrome. I trained with them as a breath teacher, so teach small and large groups. And this was all happening during the pandemic.
Okay.
And I decided this is what I want to commit my life to. So I reached out to people at Sussex Mindfulness Centre here and said, I want to research breathwork. I'm going to change direction completely. Originally, it was going to be in meditation and mindfulness. Then I said, I want to just do this. So I managed to get some funding from this institution in Tokyo. It's called the Sasakawa Young Leaders Fellowship Fund. They funded me for 3 years to do a PhD here as a breathwork
Awesome.
researcher. And yeah, this is my purpose in life, is just to research anything and everything breathwork related. Anything that involves an element of breath control, I'm very interested in it. That's why, and I'm very interested in what you guys are doing with combining movement and muscle tension with the breath.
Yeah.
I think it has enormous potential as a non-pharmacological alternative to inducing altered states of consciousness, these faster-paced breathwork practices. So yeah, and I've just recently founded the Brighton and Sussex Breathwork Lab. And that's going to be dedicated to breathwork research and practice.
Okay. Nice. I love it, man. So take me to where do you see the difference, or what are the slight differences, right? So we hear the word meditation, I think, quite often, and now I think that there's a very big trend with being a breathwork practitioner, being a breath specialist, or they have all these kind of breathing connect or meditation workshops. What for you? What is the definition of meditation, considering the amount of time that you've spent, working on it actively? And what is your definition of actually doing breath work, right? So we all breathe automatically. Obviously, there's dysregulation. As you said, you show up for this retreat and people are looking at you in disgust that you're mouth breathing, right? So where do you see the merging of both practices, and where is the separation, or what's the line that kind of divides meditation versus breath work?
It's a great question. I would say that if you're doing breath work, the first step of breath work is mindfulness and meditation, because you have to be aware of your breath in the first instance to be able to control it. So for me, breath work is literally working with the breath. So it's controlling it, regulating it. Pranayama, the classical limb of yoga, prana is vital energy or life force, synonymous with breath, and then ayama is regulation of or control of.
Okay.
So to me, it's the control of the breath. Whereas if I was going to simplify meditation to its core, it is just simple. It's awareness of the present moment.
Okay.
It's simply awareness of the present moment. It doesn't. The breath is used as the focal point of that, but as meditation practitioners become more and more adept, they broaden it out so you have full open awareness of everything.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but if I'm going to simplify it as much as possible, which is really hard to do in these sorts of practices, there's so much context around them that it's impossible to
right.
say this is this and this is that. But yeah, breath work to me is just simply anything that involves a regulation of the breath. But mindfulness and meditation provides that first step to doing that.
Towards right. Okay. Beautiful. That's a great simplification, actually.
I guess it puts the breath as the tool to allow anybody to go at meditation, because it's the one thing that everybody mostly can tell if they're breathing in or they're breathing out.
Right.
As opposed to being able to tell if their heart's beating at a certain rate or any of the other interoceptive skills we may have.
That we've brought in. And now, as we talk about methodologies towards breath work, right? How many different disciplines are there in breath work? I mean, essentially, I say this because there's a difference. I always say there's a difference between regurgitation of information versus the knowledge and wisdom right? So we think, okay, so we can breathe in through the nose, we can breathe out through the mouth, right? But essentially we're inhaling and exhaling. So it, something so, I don't want to say simple, but something so simple can have such a profound effect physiologically, psychologically, right? Emotionally, spiritually, right? All of the above. And so, how can something so simple have so many different disciplines? And how many disciplines have you seen? And how many do you think are just more kind of, how many of these people are you seeing that are coming on because you're starting to see breathwork grow? It's like the industrialization of yoga, the industrialization of breath work. Like, how much of it is kind of like BS, scamish versus the real power behind the knowledge and wisdom of proper breath practitioners?
It's a really hard question to answer.
I came prepared, bro.
I would say that this is what I love about the breath, is that no one can own it.
Mm-hmm.
So we could make a breathwork practice up right now. We could just do some inhalations for a certain amount of time, different ratios, and just call it Ed, Richard, and Guy's breathwork practice, and then trademark it. So to me, people can try as much as they want to trademark a breathwork practice, but it's the breath. Everyone has it. You own your own breath.
Right.
You can't. It's impossible. It's so ubiquitous. You can't. Everyone breathes. You can't say this is the best way to do it and this is the right way to do it. I understand that a lot of traditions or cultures will want to place a trademark on these practices because they want to protect the teachings.
Right.
They don't want them to just be used, just disseminated to everyone. They want them to have proper training of the teachers and practitioners. So I get that. I get why they would do that. Going back to like the original question at its core, it's so hard to say how many traditions there are and which ones are the most pure necessarily, because within, it's like religion. There's so many different ones, and within a
Right.
specific religion there are branches off that
Different
as well.
sects. Yeah.
For me, the most famous, well-known body of practices is from pranayama, so from yoga, from Hinduism. And then there's also Tibetan Buddhism, and they use Tummo meditation. And if you track the Wim Hof method, it combines practices from pranayama along with Buddhism, Tummo meditation.
Okay.
There's also Sufism, and they have their own breathwork practices, but they all share similarities with one another. There's something called Kapalabhati from pranayama, or Bastrika. There's similar these are very fast-paced breathing through the nostril and pumping of the diaphragm.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find these in other traditions, in other religions. You can find it in Sufism, for example, but it will have a different name.
Okay.
Again, the Wim Hof method, it's just the name of a practice which has been done for millennia. It's just now there's a name given to it, right?
There's a box of it, right? It's packaged pretty and easy.
Is it worth talking? It'd be good to get your input on it. Because it sounds like the psychiatrist that you went to were, again, similarly, they didn't put all of the eggs in the Wim Hof basket, so to speak, and there's potential risks to using that for some people. What's your perception of why those risks are there, and how you see those risks as somebody that's working in breathwork?
Another great question.
I'm happy to give my input as well.
Yeah.
But
you go first.
Well, I mean, I think we've talked about this in lab meetings and things, and this is why I brought up what I've learned from Rich, is the fact that breath is the tool for meditation, but the tool for breathing is muscles. So without proper connection to muscles, then you can breathe incorrectly, potentially, or you could breathe correctly, or you could just breathe in a better way. or you could breathe in a safer way,
Mm-hmm.
or with more confidence, and then you can perform certain tasks. And I think that when somebody has very little control over their body and you integrate something that's fairly intense, like the Wim Hof, but without proper connectedness, if that can be used as a term, then you might not be ready for what you bring up, or you might just overwhelm the system and it kind of overclocks itself, like to use a computer as a metaphor. And the concept I had is like, from my experiences working with Richard and doing the motions in our muscles, is that if somebody has tension in their left calf or their left bicep or another part of their body, that can impact their breathing at the whole body level, which
Right.
can impact the mobility of the diaphragm and everything that comes along with it. So from my perspective, that's why if you're not ready it's like saying to somebody, oh, you've got a weak back, well, go and do a 200 kilo back squat or a 200 kilo deadlift and it'll get stronger. There might be steps that you need to take before. And it sounds like you found a step like that when you were sick.
Yeah,
which
most definitely
wasn't straight in at the end.
Yeah, so if I had to do it all again with my chronic fatigue recovery, I wouldn't start with the Wim Hof method at all. But that was my way to get into.
You had to learn the hard way almost. Or
for sure.
Yeah.
It helped in the short term acutely, but long term, it wouldn't heal me from what I was experiencing. I needed to do these much more gentle practices, and I'm really glad you brought up the psychiatrists I work with again, because originally they were trained in and taught a practice called Sudarshan Kriya Yoga. And they were distributing this with Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, who's the founder of Sudarshan Kriya Yoga. And it involves fast-paced breathing as well as other practices. And some people are at risk of, resurfacing traumatic memories, or having kind of psychotic breaks if they do too intensive breath work without being aware of what they're doing. Yeah. So these Richard and Patricia, they wanted to repackage these practices without using the fast-paced stuff, just to make it very accessible for people in the West and screen out. Basically, it automatically kind of screens out those people with any contraindications, any psychiatric contraindications. And for me, I practiced probably breath, body, mind, and coherent breathing for about a 6-month period. Every day I was doing, 40 to 60 minutes a day of this slow, gentle breathwork practice whilst I was quite sick. And I would go to workshops and I would hear people's experiences of when they're doing the slow-paced breathing, their eyes are watering and they're relaxed. And I was thinking, why aren't I getting these sort of signs? Why aren't I why aren't I experiencing these physiological effects? I kind of didn't want just the psychological calming effect. I wanted to see it physiologically impacting me as well, but I wasn't. So I was discussing this with Richard Brown, and he said, "I think you're ready for some faster-paced breath work, because you clearly don't have the contraindications for it. You're not at risk of you don't have a panic disorder, intense anxiety disorder. You can definitely practice this method." So I did something called Kapalabhati, which is skull shining breath, and they use Kapalabhati in Sudarshan Kriya Yoga. They just don't give it that name. Again, this is where it all gets quite muddled.
And what does that breath work look like?
It's a simple like pumping of the navel, the abdomen,
okay.
And it's a forceful exhale and a passive inhale, and you can vary the rhythm. So I would do a few minutes of just at a pretty slow pace, which would look something like this, and then I'd ramp it up. So
okay.
And then I would drop down into coherent breathing, and I would do that for about 3 breaths per minute. So coherent breathing, the rate of coherent breathing, it should decrease as the taller you get. The resonant rate or the coherent rate will reduce. Did
Okay.
you talk a little bit about the resonant rate and the coherent rate, just to educate?
Well, I mean, I'm sure you know it better than I do, but it's realizing that our physiology is different in terms of the anatomy and the measurements, and that the length of your lungs and the length of the trachea and the time it takes for breaths to go in and out all have these cycles, and they create these cycles. And when you, I think we've discussed it on a podcast episode before, when you kind of match these cycles of things like the respiratory rate to a certain heart rate to various other physiological processes that are happening at the same time, which are probably brain waves as well, then the body gets into a coherent state and it almost starts speaking to itself much more clearly, which is,
Okay.
I guess, probably the definition of meditation as well, which is
Sure.
being in the present moment.
And it can be a byproduct of meditation. So they have looked in monks, I think it was in Japan, they were doing meditation and they would naturally respire at this rate of between 3 and 6 breaths per minute. So
Okay.
I would do this cycle. So I'd do Kapalabhati, maybe 100 breaths per minute to 200 breaths per minute, drop it down to 3 breaths per minute. And something happened where some energy was released, or some tension, or some stress, whatever you want to call it. Something happened. Something moved.
Okay.
Some kind of energy moved. And from then on, ever since I do coherent breathing, my eyes water. I will yawn, and my eyes will water, and it's all because of that one little session where I did some fast-paced breathing. So now my core routine every day is probably about 6 minutes of this Kapalabhati and dropping down into coherent breathing, and then follow it up with 15 minutes of just coherent breathing at 3 breaths per minute, 3.5 breaths per minute. Sometimes just introducing something else into there. So I might do a bit of the Swami in there as well. I guess you probably don't want to restrict your respiratory rate to a certain rhythm in the Swami, because the whole point is to explore yourself. But for me, I was just tensing the different muscle groups and just trying different things out, and also visualizing moving the breath. So you visualize moving the breath in certain channels and specific circuits around your body. And the more you practice it, and the more advanced you become, the more you can do that, and you can breathe into certain areas. And you can reverse the directions of visualization, a bit like with the Swami, where you have different levels to it.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm just that's my core practice at the moment in terms of breath work, but it's the one that's most beneficial for me.
I like it. Now, the tearing of the eyes, right? Crying. For me, it's always interesting because people either really want to shy away from it, or they are seeking the tearing or the crying as a way for them to showcase that they've done the exercise. So in your research, or what you found out, what do you see? Why is there a response of crying or tearing up with the breath work?
Why?
Yeah.
Why is it happening? Can you say why?
So I always say it's a bottom-up expression. I think there's a point of empathy, right? And I wanted you to answer, because then I wanted to see if there was some validation of my craziness. But for me, it's if we look at the body creating an observation and creating a prediction based on that observation, and exceeding the experience of the prediction, it's essentially a win, right? So you're creating a better experience that you were expecting. Therefore, you were able to bring the body into the sympathetic side of the body, right? Into an active side. It felt better than the body thought it would, and therefore it goes towards the flow, the parasympathetic again. And now you've raised your vagal tone, but there's a small shift, I think, as much physiologically as there is psychologically. And I always say it's an empathetic expression. So you let the tears coming out, as I always say, it's energy leaving the body that's been maybe stuck there for a while, and you were finally able to kind of unlock these certain levels.
I like that. kind of in the opposite direction with, say, with stress, and you have a reaction like in terms of a rash or hives. That would be
Right.
a negative expression of it, right? Of a negative feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you're saying with
Yes.
the ears, it's a positive release in terms because the body's in a better space than if it was stressed.
Yeah, I think it takes you, again, part of meditation and the breath work, right? It brings you to that present moment, which I think people have a much harder time being in the present moment that we really actually understand. And so I think that that bringing yourself either to the present moment allows you to be active, which partly I think also helps change the brain networks and puts you more towards the task positive, right? The more executive network, than staying more either on the salience or going towards the default mode of I'm just going to breathe. And at least from what I've seen with the contractions of the muscles, which again, if you're breathing in at that excessive rate and you're not used to having physical stress, that could actually be quite a bit of physical stress on the body, right? Based on who you're working with. So there's a switch there that allows you to now create a new experience with a new prediction, because you are now a little bit stronger. You're more adapted to stress because now you know how you can use the proper breathing to either upregulate or downregulate yourself.
I really like that, and I always hesitate to answer physiological questions because I'm a psychologist and not a medical doctor like Ed.
Oh, so
So I was trying to pass on the baton. My eyes are watering when I do coherent breathing, and also I yawn as soon as I place attention on my breath. I can
okay.
I can elicit a yawning kind
Don't
of,
yawn, because now we're all going to yawn.
yeah, just by having an awareness of the breath now, because I've been practicing so much. I just have this automatic need to yawn as soon as I even stop placing attention on the breath. But yeah, I'm not a yogi, so I don't know.
I find this interesting, though. You didn't want to respond to a physiological question because you're a psychologist. But doesn't that necessarily... See, you shouldn't have started yawning, bro. That's like the worst thing you could ever do. So I find it interesting because we cannot... I mean, when you look at it from an outside, right? Because I'm just me. I don't know. But when you look at it from the outside, I find it fascinating that you segment or fragment the way that you study things, because we are having physiological responses with breath work as well as
Definitely not
psychological responses,
segmenting.
right?
Definitely not separating.
Okay.
I think the mind-body connection is key. It's just I don't actually know the answers to why my
Okay.
physiological response of that.
Okay.
Of course, it's all about the psychophysiology. You can never separate mind from body or body from mind. I think it's impossible.
Right.
At least from the breath work and from this idea of expressing energy or traumas or whatever they are in the body, the mechanistic side of things is something that the conventional system hasn't gone near yet. Most of the time, they'll discuss the phenomenology of it in the psychedelic studies that come, but they haven't really. I don't know who's in the mechanism of are these memories stuck in the nerve roots, and then when you activate the brainstem in a certain way, you activating the cranial nerves, which then leads to the crying response or the yawning or I don't know if the science is there to answer the question well enough. I suppose that's having these labs and taking it forward will hopefully begin to answer, or it won't, because we'll all have neural link in our heads and we won't.
And then it won't even matter.
So, who cares as long as it works, right?
Yeah.
Who cares how it works?
Truth.
As long I'm more important. Are people feeling better or not? That's kind of what I care about. That's all I really care about. Take a very much holistic approach to it, but I don't think I'll be dedicating my life to always looking at the specific mechanisms of action. I'm kind of more broader focus. I just want to see, do people feel better? Can we share this with as many people as possible? What's the best way to do that? And yeah, obviously, of course, I'm very interested in the mechanisms of action. And I hope that when I move over to the medical school full time here, that I can work with more people in imaging, some of our colleagues, and maybe even Ed, and have a definitely have a bit better picture of the mechanisms, because it seems that people now really, they kind of crave this sort of neuroscientific perspective. They don't just want to see
Right.
anecdotal or subjective self reports. They want to see the hard mechanism, and that kind
It's
of
impressive.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah, exactly.
I think it also demystifies.
The pseudoscience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sometimes that woo and that context is what around the practice is actually what
it's
gives it
necessary.
its power.
Yeah.
So
Right. It's
yeah,
the vitality of it.
it's a bit of a shit show, to put it into words.
Yeah, I always find it fascinating when people get so caught up on the mechanism when there's a clear positive response of, but they're feeling better and they're like, but where's the paper, or what's the actual mechanism that's happening? I'm like, it's working. Like, and we've proven over over and over again that it works, but they get caught up on this one little thing, right? They're trying to find that flaw, shall we say.
On that segue, can we
Yeah.
The Swami?
Swami.
So we did.
What'd you think of Swami?
We did about half an hour.
Half an hour,
Yeah.
in my office.
Beautiful. And
Loved
how was it?
Loved it. Absolutely
Yeah.
amazing. It felt as if, I'd done a really nice, good 2 hour run, and I had the time afterwards. I was very relaxed, and it had that kind of runner's high feeling, kind of like endorphins, a lot of release, a lot of tension had been released. It's a similar sort of feeling to what I've had after very intensive breathwork sessions. That kind of somatic, cathartic release.
Yeah.
And
we did finish with glutes.
Yeah, so that was awesome.
Beautiful, even better.
That was awesome. That was very enlightening, because I was doing the bridge and doing some bridges, and you said I'd do about 20. You were like, let's go for 20 and really breathe, let your breath guide it. Then I started getting the cramp in the calf, my left calf. Like, breathe through it, just keep breathing, focus on the exhales, make the exhales longer, and that cramp will disappear. It will go up your leg and disappear, and it disappeared, which is wild to me. Doing the opposite. This is where it's a bit synonymous with intensive breath work. You're doing something that the body doesn't want you to do anymore. It's like your muscle is cramping, so therefore you should stop, but you keep going. Just like
Right.
breath work, where you're doing it hyperventilating very hard, your body's saying stop, but you keep going. So I think there's some shared common ground there in terms of what specifically happened with me. And I just thought that was amazing. And it turned out that it wasn't this area where I thought I had tension, but it could have been just my calves.
The calves, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm doing calf raises every day now.
Beautiful.
I love it.
I love it. It's interesting. So, I'm glad that Ed was able to guide you through a Swami session. And usually we do this for about an hour. And again, this is one of the things where I had a workshop on Saturday, and I had this lady that was we did a half-hour Swami session, and then we did some movements, and then theory talks and whatnot, and then back to another hour of Swami. And so I have gotten pretty deep on the emotional mapping and different chains that hold on to different behavioral cycles and traumas and perceptions of the world based on the tension in the muscles. And we finished the 1 hour Swami session. And for me, I always try and pick like the most skeptical looking person from the crowd. I think it was her coach or her friend signed her up for the course. She wasn't really sure what was going on. At least that's what it looked like from my standpoint. And we finished, and we had a very, she's like, why did you choose that side? And I was like, oh, this is what this means. And, we kind of had a little bit of I would say, superficial conversation from a very deep conversation, but everything started to click on her. And she was like, holy shit. Like, how do you know so much about how I perceive the world and what has happened to me from just watching me breathe for an hour? So it's, the neck is actually connected to the calves. And so by getting connection to calves. You're actually releasing a lot of the tension coming from the neck.
So what does that mean for me, for someone like me?
Well, I won't blast you on on a live podcast. It's not a live podcast. It's essentially, there's the left calf is they're pensive muscles, right? They're the thinking muscles. For me, the left side is always thinking towards self, and you're always thinking towards the outside, not so much internally. So there might be a cycle there of why you wanted to go into the meditation, but also why it caused the chronic fatigue, because you went so far in and then you went so far out with the masters and everything that you've had a hard time going back in. And so there could be a few different things that we can have a conversation about, of how you're perceiving your true interoception, like your true internal dialogue is still more on the analytical side than on the feeling side.
And how about the right calf?
It's thinking towards the outside world.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Left is inwards, right is...
And right is outwards, yeah.
Okay.
So if you're ever having a conversation with somebody, you start a debate and you're starting to really push, you'll start to notice that they'll start to flicker their right calf. When if you have like a really deep conversation with somebody and you actually make them think about themselves and to give you real clear answers, you'll start to see them shake on the left side.
I just shook on my left side then.
Yeah, because you started to think about your past behavioral cycles. That's so you start to see it, right? So people say that it's like ADHD and so they need to be moving. No, so they're trying to constantly think but not actually connect to the thoughts. So they're trying to, it's like a survival mechanism. And so then if you start to do it enough, but you never actually are truly connecting from the physical, the mental, the emotional, then you start to have the high neck pain.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting.
At least that's what I've
noticed. We
would
give calf raises to most clients, and it was a good practice because it allows you to be very clear on the thoughts that you have. So doing them either before you get on with your day or doing them before a walk or whenever you need to think something through. So good.
No, it was awesome, and it's great having an instructor there to guide. Because I watched the YouTube guided one that you did, and it's all obviously, when you're first doing it, it's best to have someone really show you how it's done. So I did try it once before. I did it with Ed, but when I do it with Ed, obviously that's when I got the most benefit, and we also had some music playing in the background as well, and that was really helpful.
Beautiful.
And you start with the psoas, right?
Yeah.
You applying the pressure there, and it's hard when you're doing it by yourself. It's harder because it's open-ended, right? There's no like specific time that you should do it for. It's all going to feel. So, it's a very broad practice.
Yeah.
But
there's guidelines.
Yeah, but I can see why it's tremendously beneficial. And I'd love to do an hour-long one with you both as well.
Yeah, we'll have to set it up. Beautiful. Is there anything that you're currently, obviously there's lots of things that you're working on. Is there anything specific that you're directing towards or studying for?
He needs some philanthropist who's interested in breathwork to give him lots of money. That would help.
Oh, there we go. Beautiful. So if you're somebody out there that wants to develop this breathwork section of psychology, please reach out.
Field. I think.
Yeah, field. Yeah. There we go.
And what's your opinion on breathwork? What have you practiced in any traditions or done any workshops?
No, a lot of it just has come from my own experience and experimenting with different breathing and movement. And, I'm coming more from the movement side of things and strength and conditioning, CrossFit, sports specific movement specialist, whatever you want to label it as. And so a lot of what I've done has been really just exploring Swami. Before that, using breath as a way to move correctly with heavier loads and weights and getting people out of pain. I've seen a couple things here or there, but I haven't actually done like a deep dive. I'm a very hands-on learner. And so I just start to experiment and then I get very deep into it and I try to explore every possible outcome from that scenario. I think that there is a lot of power within breath work. I think that there is also the Western world, which loves to industrialize things, which then gears towards shitty results. So you could see, yoga being one of them, right? So yoga is essentially a religious practice for Buddhism, and it came to the US and it started off as obviously wanting to better people's lives. But as you start to see the industrialization and the money machine behind yoga, now there's a yoga studio in every block. And so, and everybody's a yoga instructor. And yeah, it takes time to get your certification, which is great. But for the most part, when you look at these big yoga chains that are charging, 20 or 30 euros a month for memberships, or 50 euros, 70 euros, whatever, you start to lose the true understanding of it. And then I think it leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's palate, right? So I think the same is happening with breathwork right now. There's people that were very good at branding and getting the name out there, and they start to sell these breathwork master classes and certifications. And I've never been one for do a weekend retreat and then you get a certification. And I think that that's where the breath work is heading now, is you come do this weekend retreat, we breathe, for a weekend, and then here's your certification, and you stop really evolving the craft. And so I think that's where the breath work is heading. I think that there's a lot of benefits, and again, you can obviously see it, from a psychological perspective and a mental well-being perspective. I think a lot of the times we put more stress on the breath than we should. We need to understand that breathing is a tool to get you to become present and to accept the state that you're currently in. So listening to the breath is a tool, but the bigger system that's controlling how you're going to be breathing is also the heart rate. So if you start to negate if you start to fragment or segment just breath work as doing this, we're missing a big part. So in the long run, we're going to start to cause not necessarily harm, but just no more long-term value, because you can only apply so much stress to, right? So like the breathing, like, once you understand, you develop the skill to do the hard breath, how much more stress can you really add on to it? And so when you go to the real world and you have work and classes, or somebody tries to mug you, or there's X, Y, and Z that starts to become too much stimulus inward, the breath can only take you so far. And that's where I think movement also needs to become a part of it. But I think that it's a great starting point for anybody, especially if you have, again, chronic fatigue, or you're really kind of on a down, or having anxiety disorders and panic attacks and such.
Yeah, I would say that it's always best to start slow with these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's like in exercise as well, and running and lifting weights, whatever. I don't think I would have had as profound benefits from more intensive or faster paced breath work if I hadn't have done the more slow and gentle stuff and laid that foundation
Right.
for a long time before.
And having a guide.
Yeah. For sure.
That's always important.
Because there's people now dying from the Wim Hof, but mostly because they're freezing themselves to death, I think.
Yeah, it's what are you people doing?
Or they're doing the breath work in bodies of water, which is just the last place you should be doing that.
Right.
So yeah, always do it away from water.
I mean, but it does kind of showcase you what it is, right? Like, it's always, you can't negate the elephant in the room. Like, okay, maybe 100 years ago, you needed to survive a cold winter, right? And obviously lots of people have died of cold winters in the past because they didn't have heating, X, Y, and Z. But it's not something that you should just continuously put your body through. For what? I think that, again, people start to miss. The problem is people start to get addicted, like we talked about, like the crying, right? Like they want that experience. And it's just, it's another form of addiction. It's like, okay, well, I won't be drinking, but I'm going to be doing an ice bath, and I'm going to go colder and colder and colder until you can't go any more cold because you'd be in an ice cube. And then after that, then it's like, okay, so and I'll just do longer, 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 where you're just continuously searching for a stimulus that is still only treating a symptom and not necessarily resulting in understanding the root cause of why you're using so much cold water to run away from your
Yeah, I was
problems.
going to say, I take it you're not an ice bath man every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't be that Iceman at bath every day.
But I think the most profound experience that I've had with breathwork was in Amsterdam, and it was at a breathwork workshop before this conference, the interdisciplinary conference for psychedelic research, and it was led by an amazing guide and her team. And I'd love to introduce you to them so you can experience
Yeah.
it. And the insight that I gained from this workshop, 5-hour workshop, uh, breathing was only 1 hour of it. So I think what you do before and after the breath work is just as important as the breath work itself. So how you prime yourself, how you integrate afterwards. The insight that I had was that I don't need to keep searching for anything. I'm good just as it's always just been me, and that's all it ever was. Not in an
Right.
egotistical way, but in a way of you don't need to keep chasing after these X, Y, Z, do these different things all the time.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, I just do it out of enjoyment now. So when Ed tells me about infrared and red light and things like that, I buy a device because I'm interested in it, but I'm not thinking, oh, this is it. This is going to fix me, or
Right.
this is going to cure whatever. That's why I was like when had chronic fatigue, and rightly so. I was problem solving the whole entire time. Like this will help me, this will fix me, this will fix me. But the thing that I mainly needed, apart from you know reducing stress and doing breath work and getting natural light and stuff like that, was time
Right.
and a support network of people around you. It's so health is so holistic that we get lost.
The environment is
Yeah,
a big part.
yeah.
Yeah, I always say there's a. I always have this conversation of passive versus active, right? Like if you're looking for the next thing that's going to heal you, it's never going to work because you're relying on the tool on the exterior. So you're still going at it from the victim mentality rather than the wisdom side of things of like, okay, I'm going to see what I experience here and see what I can take away from it. And so I think that's always a very big thing. I say the same thing with Swami. It's like Swami won't make you better. It creates awareness, but you could do the breathing and still take a nap. You can do X, Y, and Z because you're trying to. In my head, I always have the narrative of like, if you think that I'm going to help you, you're always going to fail because already in your head, you're using me as a justification of why you don't want to change. And I think that's a really big undertaking, right? The willingness versus capability. If you come in from this is going to help me, you're already in a victim mentality and you're finding ways and justifications to not change or evolve as a human.
And do you? I guess you give this, speech before you start doing this work with people. Is that correct, or
Yeah,
will you wait,
100%.
or will you react and see, or will you put this out and inform everyone before you lead sessions or
Yeah, I mean, we always have these conversations, and I'm like, I'm here to navigate, and I can see
navigate?
things, and
You're a navigator. I like that.
yeah, and again, it takes time, right? I mean, it's just there is no, like you said, I needed time to heal from the chronic fatigue. You needed time to continuously positively adapt to more and more stress. That's all it was. And you needed time to rest. You know what I mean? But that people skew these timelines. And again, going back to where breath work is will end up going this year and how you're going to start to see the industrialization of everybody wanting to become a breath practitioner and trying to sell their weekend courses is they're trying to gain a quick nickel instead of waiting it out for the long dime.
So how do you incorporate that in what you're doing? Because I know you offer retreats. Is it they? But I'm aware they're staggered. They're in longer periods of time. They're in a few months' time. There's a workshop in 1 week.
Yeah. So,
How do you
I mean,
combat that in your head and not
I
get?
plant seeds, and then the movement, the work that's done afterwards is a big part, right? So I won't heal anybody, but we'll get the answers that we need. So I always go and search for the root cause, and then we create plans forward. And then it's the willingness and the capability of the person to take responsibility for themselves to do the work.
Yeah.
It's like saying, okay, well, I'm going to buy your course, but I'm not going to take it, but I'm going to have the certification, and then therefore I'm better. Not really, right? So it's the capacity to have solutions and the capacity to understand that we are humans and there is no linear progression.
Yeah.
You are going to have downfalls, right? I mean, I'm guessing with your chronic fatigue, you started to feel good, and then you would crash again, feel good, and so we're just diminishing the amplitude of mistakes or the amplitude of fatigue that you get the next time and the next time and the next time.
Yeah, my sister sent me a great graphic when I was quite sick, and healing isn't linear, and it's kind of like a
Right.
trajectory going like that. But ultimately it is going up, but it's a rocky road. Yeah, it's
Finding
Exactly.
yeah, finding exactly. Great, you brought up the industrialization and everything like that. That's why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. You'll see I've published a few papers in 2023, and it talks about trying to calibrate the hype with evidence so that the field of breathwork and scientific research can grow and evolve in a sustainable, evidence-based manner, not like meditation and mindfulness, which 30 years ago there was a few hundred papers. Now there's 10,000 plus, and
Right.
it's been given this
Damn.
brand. Been given this brand of like muck mindfulness. So
Right.
I don't want that to happen with breathwork, and that's why I'm doing the research that I'm doing. And we're in our papers and in our reviews that you'll see that we're advocating heavily for like very good clinical robust research into this, and we list out all these contraindications of these very intense fast-paced breathwork practices just to inform people know what you're doing before you jump in.
Right.
And it's extremely important for breathwork people, breath workers, facilitators to done training for a long period of time and worked with people in the altered states of consciousness, because you have to help people navigate.
It can lead people right, and that's
It's similar to
the same thing
psychotherapy,
with.
right?
Right, exactly. You can open up doors that will never be closed again.
And yeah, I have a friend who's working on creating a board to try and make sure that it's not just the Wild West out there and just leading groups of tens or hundreds of people in a very intense breathwork routine with just one person. That's crazy. There should be at least one
Right.
facilitator per 4 to 6 people if you're doing the really intense breathwork. The good thing about slow-paced breathing and things of that sort is that the safety and risk and the tolerability profile is good. But again, even having an instructor in these slow-paced methods is fantastic as well. And it's always, I hear you. I echo everything you're saying about proper, accreditation and proper learning before just disseminating it willy-nilly. And that's why I would do the work that I do.
So, if there are people out there that are listening to this and are thinking of taking a breathwork course or going to one of these retreats, outside of suggesting movement, ayahuasca, and Swami, of course, what would you say would be maybe your top 3 things to look out for if it's going to be more of a scam or this sort of woo woo type bullshit or actual legitimate breathwork practitioner? Or what could they ask the hosts to make sure that it's something that feels a little bit more legitimate?
Well, if they're not providing informed consent, listing out the potential contraindications,
Okay.
that's a red flag.
Hmm.
If they're not saying you shouldn't be doing this if you have panic disorder, prone to aneurysms, any cerebral cardiovascular diseases, and things of that sort, panic disorder,
Yeah.
epilepsy, if you're prone to epilepsy or strokes. If they're not saying this sort of stuff before, they shouldn't be going along to those kinds of workshops. And key thing is to know is that what's the integration period like after? Do I have a period? Is there going to be a period of time where we just integrate? So you're not just going into hyperventilation and then just stopping and just walking out into the world. If you're
Right.
hyperventilating for an hour and a half, what it's going to some powerful things are going to happen inside of you. You know, there's going to be some profound effects, positive or negative. So just asking ahead, like, you know, what's the structure of it? Is there a period of integration afterwards? And usually that will take the form of group discussion and things of that sort. If you're looking for legitimate breathwork workshops in terms of this hyperventilation type stuff, I would look at my review in neuroscience and biobehavioral reviews, and it's called High Ventilation Breathwork.
Okay.
And it just lists out the different programs. So there's like holotropic breathing, there's rebirthing, there's something called conscious connected breathing. But these are all like, they're all used in different traditions, in different workshops as well. But it's just to make sure that you talk with the facilitators beforehand, make sure they're giving the proper informed consent. And just get a sense of what the people are like first, obviously.
Beautiful.
It's great to have a connection with the facilitator before you trust them in the process, just like a guide in psychedelics.
Right. Awesome. Beautiful. Anything else to add, Mr. Ed?
Oh, you're talking to me?
Yes, sir.
I was playing the Dr. Ed joke again. No, if we want to find more about your papers, people can just search on PubMed.
Yeah, PubMed.
Send me the links and I'll put them on the description.
Sweet. Yeah, you just go to my Twitter /X breath_guy.
Perfect. I'll put all of that on the
awesome
on the.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to the whole planting seeds for the long term.
Yeah.
Because there's no linear progression. So usually people will tell you quite harsh truths sometimes. And I think we're softer on that. But someone like, I was listening to a podcast with Jack Cruz recently, and he calls it giving people a punch in the mouth, because then they actually wake up and decide to change. And that's the technique that he uses. They just got me thinking about that. But yeah, we don't punch you in the mouth, but you have your own little term that you use to plant seeds for the future.
Yeah, ninja fuck people.
On that.
Have you ever heard that term, Guy?
No.
Ninja fuck.
What did you say?
It's called ninja fucking. So essentially, you're putting in words in the brain that make you wonder and ponder. And then it might not mean anything right now, but then a few weeks, a few months, a few years later, it's like, oh shit, that's what he was talking about. It's a great Dane Cook comedy routine.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember Dane Cook.
How about just been ninja effed?
Ninja effed, yeah.
How about just been?
You have.
Has it just happened to me?
You may have. I don't know. You're going to soon find out. That's the best part. He explains it as you're about to go out with your guy friends and you tell your wife or your partner, you're like, hey, I'm going out with the guy friends. She goes, oh, okay, have fun. And cuts it short. And you start walking out to the car like, this is going to be a good time. She said, have fun. All right. We're going to have some beers. We're going to go dancing. And then he starts driving. He's like, did she mean like have fun, or like, okay, have fun? Like, where the fuck are you going? Should I have not gone? Is she mad at me? Is she upset that I'm going out? And so it starts the whole process. So I've stolen that from Dane Cook and used it quite often. It's a great bit.
Good place to end. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you very much. Go follow Mr. Guy. Do you have Instagram or only X?
Just the Twitter. Yeah.
Twitter, the X, the everything app.
I gotta say Twitter.
Beautiful. I gotta start getting more on the Twitter.
Yeah.
On the X. Anyhow.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for listening, guys, and we'll catch you soon.